2,000 miles of unmarked graves. The Appalachian Trail stretches from Georgia to Maine, and somewhere along those 2,000 miles, people are dying in ways that are never fully explained. Tonight we explore why experienced hikers vanish just feet from the trail, why bodies are found naked in freezing temperatures, why people hear their own names called from the woods when they're hiking alone, and the disturbing truth about what watches from the tree line after dark. The green ocean stand at the base of Springer Mountain in Georgia, the southern terminus of the Appalachian Trail, and look north. What you see is not individual trees or distinct landscapes. What you see is an ocean of green that rolls away into the distance, wave after wave of forest canopy that extends unbroken for 2,190 miles to Mount Katahdin in Maine. This is what hikers call the Green Tunnel. It is not a metaphor. It is a precise description of what long-distance hiking on the Appalachian Trail feels like. You enter the forest and you do not leave it. Not truly. For days, for weeks, for months, if you are attempting a through hike, you walk beneath a canopy so thick that the sky becomes a memory. The psychological effect of this is profound and rarely discussed in hiking guides or trail literature. Humans are not adapted to spend weeks in environments where the horizon is measured in feet rather than miles. Our spatial cognition depends on being able to see distance, to judge where we are in relation to landmarks, to orient ourselves using visible features of the landscape. But in the Green Tunnel, there are no landmarks. Every section of forest looks like every other section. The same trees, the same undergrowth, the same filtered light. You walk for 8 hours and cover 12 miles, and at the end of the day, when you look around at where you have camped, it looks exactly like where you started that morning. This creates a form of sensory deprivation. Your brain stops processing the environment as meaningful. Everything becomes visual noise, undifferentiated green and brown, repetitive to the point of meaninglessness. Hikers describe entering a trance state, walking automatically, losing track of time, having no memory of the miles they have covered. This is when people walk off the trail. Not consciously, not deciding to leave the marked path, but their attention drifts, their foot catches on a root, they step aside to let another hiker pass, they see something interesting off to the side, and suddenly they are 5 feet from the trail, then 10 feet, then 20, and 20 feet is enough. 20 feet into the forest, and the trail disappears. The white blazes that mark the path are no longer visible. The sounds of other hikers fade instantly, absorbed by the vegetation. You are alone in forest that looks identical in every direction. Experienced hikers know this danger. They know that stepping off trail, even briefly, is how people die. But the knowledge does not always prevent the action. The psychological effect of the Green Tunnel, the way it numbs awareness and dulls attention, means that even careful hikers make mistakes. The Appalachian Mountains themselves contribute to this disorientation in ways that are not immediately obvious. These are old mountains. Not old as in formed millions of years ago, old as in formed hundreds of millions of years ago. The Appalachians are older than trees. They are older than fish. They are older than land animals. They were formed roughly 480 million years ago, during a time when the continents were arranged completely differently, when North America and Africa were colliding to form the supercontinent Pangaea. At their peak, the Appalachians may have been as tall as the Himalayas, but 480 million years of erosion has worn them down. What remains are the roots of ancient mountains, the deep core geology exposed by countless millennia of wind and water and ice. This matters because the geology of the Appalachians is fundamentally different from younger mountain ranges. The rock is older, denser, more complex. Layers of different minerals are folded and compressed together. This creates magnetic anomalies throughout the mountain range, areas where the Earth's magnetic field is distorted by the composition of the underlying rock. Compasses behave strangely in the Appalachians. Experienced hikers know this, know to verify compass readings against landmarks, know not to trust a single directional reading. But for those who are lost, who are desperate for navigation help, a compass that points the wrong direction can be fatal. The old geology also creates confusing terrain. The mountains do not have clear peaks and valleys like younger ranges. Instead, they have complex topography, ridges that branch and reconnect, valleys that seem to lead somewhere but dead end, slopes that all look identical. Hiking in the Appalachians means constantly climbing and descending, rarely traveling in a straight line, following a path that switchbacks and meanders for reasons that are not always apparent. This is the environment that has killed more hikers than any other trail system in North America. Not because it is the most technically difficult, not because it has the worst weather or the most dangerous wildlife, but because it is 2,000 miles of dense forest in complex terrain where getting lost is easy and being found is hard. The Green Tunnel creates a specific kind of horror, one that is difficult to explain to people who have not experienced it. It is claustrophobia without being in a confined space. It is the feeling of being buried alive while standing under an open sky you cannot see. It is knowing that other people are nearby, that the trail is close, that civilization is not far away, but being unable to reach any of it because you cannot orient yourself in forest that looks the same in every direction. Hikers describe this feeling as drowning. They say being lost in the Appalachian forest feels like being underwater, like being surrounded by something that presses in from all sides, that distorts sound and sight, that makes every direction look like a way out but leads only to more of the same. The psychological term for this is woods shock, the specific form of panic that occurs when someone realizes they are lost in dense forest. It is not the same as being lost in open terrain like deserts or plains. In open terrain, you can see for miles, you can identify landmarks, you can make rational decisions about which direction to travel. But in dense forest, especially the particular density of the Appalachian forest, woods shock sets in faster and stronger. You cannot see where you are. You cannot see where you are going. You cannot see where you have been. Every direction looks identical, and your brain, evolved to navigate open savannas, has no framework for processing this information. Woods shock causes people to make catastrophically bad decisions. They abandon their backpacks, thinking they need to move faster. They leave the supplies that would keep them alive. They walk in circles, sometimes crossing their own tracks multiple times without recognizing them. They exhaust themselves trying to move quickly through terrain that requires slow, careful travel, and most dangerously, woods shock causes people to keep moving when they should stop. Survival experts universally advise that if you are lost, you should stop walking, stay in one place, make yourself visible, and wait for rescue. But people in woods shock cannot follow this advice. The panic is too intense. The need to move, to do something, to find a way out, overrides rational thought. So they walk. They walk for hours, for days, moving deeper into the forest, getting further from the trail, exhausting their energy and their supplies, and the forest absorbs them. The Green Tunnel closes around them, and they become another statistic, another missing person, another body that may or may not ever be found. How? The cold kills. The Appalachian Trail passes through 14 states, crossing climate zones from the humid subtropical forests of Georgia to the boreal forests of Maine. But despite this diversity, one constant danger exists along the entire length of the trail: cold. People who are not familiar with mountain environments often underestimate how cold it can get, even in summer. The temperature drops approximately 3.5 degrees Fahrenheit for every 1,000 feet of elevation gain. The Appalachian Trail regularly climbs to elevations above 6,000 feet. In the southern Appalachians, this means temperatures 30 degrees colder than the valleys. In the northern Appalachians, it means freezing temperatures possible even in July. Add wind and rain, both common on exposed ridges, and the effective temperature drops even further through wind chill and evaporative cooling. A hiker who is comfortable at 70 degrees in the valley can be hypothermic at 45 degrees on the ridge, especially if they are wet and tired. Hypothermia is the leading cause of death on the Appalachian Trail. Not falls, not animal attacks, not getting lost, cold, the body losing heat faster than it can generate it, core temperature dropping, systems shutting down. The progression of hypothermia is well documented. It happens in stages, each more dangerous than the last. In mild hypothermia, core temperature drops to 95 degrees Fahrenheit. The body responds by shivering, trying to generate heat through muscle activity. The person feels cold but remains mentally alert. In moderate hypothermia, core temperature drops to 90 to 95 degrees. Shivering becomes violent and uncontrollable. Mental function begins to decline. Decision-making becomes impaired. Fine motor skills deteriorate, making it difficult to open zippers, work buckles, or perform any task requiring dexterity. In severe hypothermia, below 90 degrees core temperature, shivering stops. This is not a sign of improvement. This is a sign that the body has given up trying to generate heat, that it is conserving energy for core functions, that death is approaching. Mental function collapses, speech becomes slurred or stops entirely, movement becomes clumsy and uncoordinated. And then, in many cases, something truly disturbing happens. Paradoxical undressing. This phenomenon was first documented in medical literature in the early 1900s, but it has been observed for as long as people have been dying of cold. In the final stages of hypothermia, 20 to 50% of victims remove their clothing. They strip naked in freezing temperatures, discarding the very items that could save their lives. For decades, this behavior was unexplained, attributed to confusion and altered mental states. But research in the 1980s and 1990s revealed the mechanism. As hypothermia progresses, blood vessels near the skin constrict, trying to preserve core temperature by reducing heat loss from the extremities. But in the final stages, these blood vessels suddenly dilate, flooding the skin with relatively warm blood from the body's core. The person experiences an overwhelming sensation of heat. They feel like they are burning up, like they are overheating, like they need to cool down immediately. In their confused, hypothermic state, they remove their clothes. They peel off layers one by one, discarding hats and gloves and jackets and pants, stripping down to underwear or nothing at all. Then the cold, which they no longer accurately perceive, kills them. The heat they felt was an illusion created by dying blood vessels. The actual temperature has not changed. They are still freezing, but now they are freezing without the protection of clothing. Bodies found in this condition create disturbing crime scenes. A hiker is found dead, naked, or nearly naked in snow or freezing rain. Their clothes are nearby, sometimes folded neatly, sometimes scattered. There are no signs of foul play, no injuries, no indication that anyone else was involved. Investigators who are not familiar with paradoxical undressing sometimes suspect sexual assault or other crimes. Why else would someone be found naked in the wilderness? But the explanation is simpler and more tragic. The person died of cold, and their own body lied to them at the end, told them they were hot when they were freezing, convinced them to remove the clothing that might have saved them. This has happened on the Appalachian Trail multiple times. Bodies found in spring or fall, the seasons when hypothermia risk is highest, naked or in underwear, surrounded by discarded clothing. The deaths are ruled accidental hypothermia. But for families and friends, the image of their loved ones stripping naked in the woods, in the cold, confused, and dying alone, is a horror that never fully fades. The timeline of hypothermia can be shockingly fast. In wet conditions with wind, core temperature can drop 1 or 2 degrees per hour. A hiker who is caught in rain on an exposed ridge, who gets soaked through, who does not have proper gear or does not recognize the symptoms, can go from feeling uncomfortably cold to being in severe hypothermia in 3 to 4 hours. This speed is why hypothermia kills experienced hikers, people who should know better, people who have the right equipment. They underestimate how quickly it happens. They think they have time to reach the next shelter, to get to lower elevation, to warm up once they stop for the night. But hypothermia does not wait. It progresses relentlessly, and by the time the person realizes they are in serious danger, their mental function has already degraded to the point where they cannot make good decisions. The trail shelters, 3-sided wooden structures spaced roughly every 10 to 15 miles along the trail, are meant to provide protection from cold and rain. But in severe conditions, they are insufficient. The shelters have no doors, no heat source, no insulation. They keep rain off hikers and provide some wind protection, but they do not keep people warm. Multiple deaths have occurred in trail shelters. Hikers who reached shelter, who thought they were safe, who went to sleep and never woke up. Their bodies were found in the morning by other hikers, dead from hypothermia despite being inside, despite being out of the rain, despite doing what they thought was the right thing. The problem is that reaching shelter gives a false sense of security. The hiker thinks they are safe now, that they can rest, that their body will recover. But if their core temperature has already dropped too far, if they are already in moderate or severe hypothermia, simply being out of the rain is not enough. They need active warming, need dry clothes, need hot food and drinks, need interventions that are not available in a trail shelter. So they die. They die in shelters within sight of the trail, in locations that other hikers pass regularly. They die because cold is insidious, because hypothermia impairs the judgment needed to recognize hypothermia, because the body's warning systems fail at exactly the moment when they are most needed. And in some cases, they die naked, victims of paradoxical undressing, their final act. A confused attempt to cool down when they should have been warming up, their bodies found by horrified hikers who will spend the rest of their lives wondering what horror that person experienced in their final confused moments. The most famous deaths. The Appalachian Trail has claimed hundreds of lives since it was completed in 1937. Most of these deaths are accidents, exposure, falls, heart attacks, natural causes. But some deaths become famous, either because of the circumstances, because of what they reveal about the trail's dangers, or because they represent the specific horror of dying alone in the wilderness. Geraldine Largay, trail name Inchworm, became the most famous Appalachian Trail death of the modern era. Her case encapsulates every fear about getting lost in the woods, about being close to rescue but unable to reach it, about dying slowly while help searches nearby. In July 2013, Largay was attempting a through hike with her husband George. George was not hiking with her but was leapfrogging along the trail, meeting her at road crossings, providing support. Geraldine was hiking alone between these meeting points, a common arrangement for older or less experienced through hikers who want the experience but need logistical support. On July 22nd, Geraldine reached a campsite near the trail in Maine. She needed to use the bathroom. She stepped off the trail into the forest. This is normal practice, stepping away from the trail for privacy. Hikers do it constantly. Step 10 or 15 feet into the woods, do your business, return to the trail. Simple, safe, routine. Geraldine stepped off the trail and could not find her way back. In dense Maine forest, in terrain that all looked identical, she became disoriented. She wandered, trying to find the trail. She could not. She was perhaps 100 feet from the marked path, close enough that she should have been able to see the white blazes, close enough that someone on the trail should have heard her if she called out. But the forest absorbed her. The green tunnel closed around her. She was lost, completely lost, mere feet from safety. Geraldine survived for 26 days. This is known because she kept a journal, writing entries to her husband, documenting her situation. The journal entries begin with confusion and frustration. She is lost but expects to find the trail soon. She describes her attempts to navigate, to find water, to stay warm. As days pass, the entries become more desperate. She has run out of food. She is weak. She can hear helicopters overhead, can hear search efforts, but cannot signal them. The forest is too dense. Her whistle, her calls for help, travel only a few dozen feet before being absorbed by vegetation. She writes about her love for George. She apologizes for getting lost. She expresses hope that she will be found, that this will end, that she will be rescued. But as the entries continue, hope fades. She knows she is dying. She knows the searchers cannot find her. She knows that she will die alone in the forest, so close to the trail that she could walk to it in 5 minutes, if only she knew which direction to go. The final entries are heartbreaking. She is too weak to write much. She tells George she loves him. She tells him not to blame himself. She tells him she tried. Geraldine Largay died of starvation and exposure sometime in late August 2013. Her body was not found until October 2015, over 2 years later. She was located by a survey crew working in the forest. She was 2 miles from the trail, 2 miles from where she was last seen, 2 miles from where the intensive search had focused. 2 miles is nothing in the context of a 2,000-mile trail. It is a short afternoon hike. It is a distance most people could walk in 40 minutes, but in the dense Maine forest, 2 miles is infinity. It is far enough that searchers, even thorough searchers, even searchers using dogs and helicopters and organized ground teams, could not find her. The psychological horror of Geraldine's death resonates with everyone who hikes, everyone who camps, everyone who has stepped into the woods. She made the smallest mistake, the briefest lapse in attention. She stepped off the trail for a minute, and that minute became her entire remaining life. 26 days of slowly dying, hearing rescue efforts nearby but unable to reach them, knowing that her family was searching but unable to signal them. Her death could happen to anyone. That is what makes it terrifying. She was not reckless. She was not unprepared. She was not attempting something dangerous. She stepped into the woods to pee. And she never came back. The case of Meredith Emerson reveals a different danger on the Appalachian Trail: human predators. In January 2008, Emerson was hiking on Blood Mountain in Georgia, the highest peak on the Georgia section of the trail. She was with her dog, a Labrador mix, hiking a popular day trail on a weekend when many other people were on the mountain. Gary Hilton, a drifter who had been living on and around the Appalachian Trail for years, encountered Emerson on the trail. He engaged her in conversation, appearing friendly, appearing like any other hiker. Then, when they were away from other people, he attacked her. Hilton abducted Emerson, taking her off trail, holding her captive for several days. He eventually murdered her, decapitated her to prevent identification, and scattered her remains. He was caught because of witness statements from other hikers who had seen him on the trail, because of forensic evidence, because he was careless in his disposal of evidence. Hilton confessed not only to Emerson's murder, but to several others. He had been using the Appalachian Trail and surrounding forests as hunting grounds, targeting solo hikers, particularly women, abducting and killing them. The trail gave him cover, gave him access to victims, gave him wilderness areas where bodies could be hidden and might never be found. Emerson fought. Evidence showed she resisted her attacker, that she tried to escape, that she survived for several days trying to find a way out. But Hilton had experience. He knew the woods. He knew how to control victims in wilderness settings, and he knew that once he got someone off trail, away from witnesses, the forest itself became his accomplice. This case shattered the assumption that the Appalachian Trail is safe from violent crime. Hikers had always worried about natural dangers, weather, getting lost, injuries, animals. But the idea that another hiker might be a predator, that the friendly person you meet on the trail might be planning to kill you, this was new terror. After Emerson's murder, awareness increased. Hikers became more cautious about sharing their locations, about hiking alone, about trusting strangers encountered on trail. But the fundamental truth remained. The Appalachian Trail is a 2,000-mile corridor through wilderness, accessible from hundreds of road crossings, impossible to patrol or secure. Anyone can be on the trail. And some of them are there because the wilderness provides cover for crimes that would be difficult to commit in civilization. James Jordan's crimes in 1990 revealed yet another category of trail danger. Jordan was a drifter who had been living on the Appalachian Trail for years, moving between shelters, rarely going into towns, surviving on supplies discarded by other hikers or stolen from unattended gear. In May 1990, Jordan shot 2 hikers in their sleep at a shelter in Pennsylvania. One died, one survived with severe injuries. Jordan fled into the woods. A massive manhunt ensued, involving state police, federal agents, and local volunteers. Jordan was captured after several days, but the incident revealed how vulnerable hikers are while sleeping in trail shelters. The shelters are open structures. Anyone can approach. You are sleeping in a thin sleeping bag on a wooden platform. If someone walks up to the shelter in the middle of the night, you are completely exposed, completely defenseless. Jordan walked up to a shelter where hikers were sleeping and shot them at close range. The other hikers in the shelter woke to gunfire, chaos, confusion, not understanding what was happening until it was over. This scenario, attack while sleeping, is a fear that haunts long-distance hikers. You are exhausted from a day of hiking. You fall asleep in a shelter or in your tent. You are deeply asleep, vulnerable, and you do not hear someone approach. You do not wake until it is too late. Most violence on the Appalachian Trail comes from other hikers or from locals who access the trail from nearby roads. But the wilderness setting makes these crimes particularly terrifying. There are no witnesses, no security cameras, no police nearby. If someone decides to hurt you, the forest absorbs the crime. By the time anyone realizes something is wrong, the attacker has hours or days to disappear into the woods. These famous deaths share common elements: isolation, vulnerability, the realization that help is not coming fast enough, the awareness that the forest, beautiful and peaceful during the day, becomes something else at night, becomes a place where people die and their deaths go unwitnessed, unexplained, unresolved. The deaths also reveal that the trail's greatest danger is not any single specific threat. It is the combination of factors: difficult terrain, psychological stress, physical exhaustion, isolation, and the ever-present possibility that something will go wrong in a place where help is far away and rescue is difficult. The zone of silence. Sound behaves differently in dense forests than in open areas. This is physics, measurable and explainable. Sound waves travel through air until they encounter an object. In open areas, sound can travel for miles. You can hear thunder from storms that are 10 miles away. You can hear trains from 5 miles distant. In quiet conditions, a human shout can be heard at a quarter mile. But in dense forest, sound travels poorly. The trees, the undergrowth, the leaves, the branches, all of these absorb sound energy. High-frequency sounds are absorbed most efficiently. A human voice, which contains primarily mid and high frequencies, is absorbed very quickly. Studies of sound propagation in forests show that a shout in dense forest can become inaudible at distances of less than 100 feet. In very dense forest, particularly the laurel thickets and rhododendron hills common in the Appalachians, sound may travel less than 50 feet before it is absorbed below the level of detectability. This creates what hikers call zones of silence, areas where you can scream for help and no one hears you, not because help is far away, but because the sound of your voice dies before it reaches anyone. Geraldine Largay experienced this. She was lost in Maine forest, disoriented, unable to find the trail. She must have shouted, she must have screamed, she must have yelled for help at the top of her lungs. But the forest absorbed the sound. Hikers passed within 100 feet of where she was lost and heard nothing. Search teams walked nearby, calling her name, and she may have heard them, may have shouted back, but her voice did not carry far enough. The zone of silence swallowed her. This phenomenon creates specific horror. You are lost. You are hurt. You need help. You can hear people nearby. You can hear voices, footsteps on the trail, conversations. Help is close. But when you shout, when you scream, when you use every bit of strength to call for rescue, your voice dies in the vegetation. No one hears, no one comes. You are surrounded by people and utterly alone. Hikers who have been lost and then rescued describe this as one of the most psychologically damaging aspects of the experience. They knew people were nearby. They could hear the trail, hear other hikers, hear civilization, but they could not make themselves heard. They shouted until their voices gave out, until their throats were raw, until they had no strength left, and no one came. The zones of silence are not uniform. They vary based on terrain, vegetation density, and weather conditions. Some areas of the trail have relatively good sound propagation. You can hear other hikers from a reasonable distance. You can hear streams, hear wind in the trees, hear the sounds that help you orient yourself. But other areas are different. Hikers describe these sections as eerily quiet, as if the forest is muffling everything. They describe shouting and hearing nothing echo back, as if the sound simply stops, absorbed instantly. They describe the feeling that they are alone in a way that is different from normal solitude, that the forest has cut them off from the world so completely that even sound cannot escape. Some hikers report what they call deaf spots, specific locations on the trail where acoustic properties are bizarre. You can be talking to a hiking partner who is 10 feet ahead of you and they cannot hear you. You can shout, and the person in front turns around, says they heard nothing. You try again, louder, and they hear only a faint murmur. These deaf spots may be caused by topography. by the way sound reflects off rock faces or is absorbed by particular configurations of vegetation. But experiencing one is deeply unsettling. You are suddenly aware of how fragile communication is, how easily you could become cut off from your companions, how a few steps in the wrong direction could make you unhearable. Emergency whistles, which are recommended equipment for all hikers, work better than voices. The sound of a whistle is higher frequency and carries better than human speech. But even whistles have limitations in dense forest. The sound travels further than a voice, but not dramatically further. In the densest sections of the trail, a whistle might be audible at 200 feet instead of 50. This is better, but still not far enough to be reliably heard by passing hikers if you are off trail. The zone of silence compounds every other danger on the trail. If you are injured, if you need help, your primary means of signaling that help is needed is to shout or use a whistle. But if those signals do not travel far enough, if the forest absorbs them before they reach anyone, then being injured becomes more dangerous. You cannot be heard, so you cannot be found. So the injury that might be survivable with quick rescue becomes fatal. The optical illusion of nearness makes this worse. When you look through the forest, you can see perhaps 30 to 50 feet before the trees and undergrowth block your line of sight. Your brain interprets this as meaning that is how far away help could be. You think that if you shout, anyone within that visible distance will hear you, but sound does not travel as far as sight in forest. You might be able to see 50 feet, but sound might only travel 30 feet. So you shout at people you can see and they do not respond, and you think they are ignoring you when the truth is they cannot hear you. The sound of your voice is absorbed by the vegetation before it reaches them. This creates the nightmare scenario experienced by many lost hikers. They can see the trail, or they think they can see the trail, or they can see people, or they can see structures. Help is visible. But they cannot reach it. They shout and no one responds. They wave and no one sees them. They are trapped in the zone of silence, visible but unreachable, close to rescue but unable to signal. The psychological impact of this cannot be overstated. Humans are social animals. We rely on communication, on our ability to call out and be heard, to signal our location and have others respond. When this basic function fails, when we shout and no one hears, it triggers deep primal fear. We are abandoned. We are alone. No one is coming. And in the Appalachian forest, in the green tunnel, in the zones of silence, this fear is justified. You can shout yourself hoarse. You can scream until your throat bleeds. You can use every technique you know for signaling distress. And if you are in the wrong place, if the forest is dense enough, if the acoustic properties are wrong, your voice will die in the leaves and no one will know you are there. Tent horror. Night in the forest is different from night in civilization. In towns and cities, night means artificial light, means streetlights and house lights and car headlights. It means being able to see where you are going, being able to identify shapes and objects, being able to tell what is nearby. But in the forest, night means absolute darkness, no light pollution, no ambient glow. When the sun sets and the moon is down or obscured by clouds, the darkness is total. You cannot see your hand in front of your face. You cannot see trees 3 feet away. You cannot see anything that is not directly illuminated by a flashlight or headlamp. This darkness is the environment in which backpackers sleep. Some sleep in trail shelters, open 3-sided structures that provide a roof but no walls, no door, no barrier between you and the forest. Others sleep in tents, lightweight shelters made of thin nylon fabric that keeps rain out but does not prevent anything else. Sleeping in a tent in the forest means lying in darkness, enclosed in a thin membrane of fabric, aware that the only thing between you and whatever is outside is material so thin you can see shadows through it. The tent provides no protection. It is not strong enough to keep anything out. It is a privacy screen, a rain barrier, a psychological comfort, but it is not shelter in any real sense. And at night, you hear things outside the tent. This is inevitable. The forest is full of creatures that move at night. Mice and squirrels and raccoons rustling through leaves, Deer walking past camp, insects buzzing, wind moving branches. Every night sounds like there is something just outside the tent, something moving around, something close. Most of the time, these sounds are harmless. A mouse investigating your food bag, a deer passing through, nothing threatening, nothing to fear. But you cannot see what is making the sound, you can only hear it. And your brain, evolved to be cautious about unseen threats, interprets every sound as potential danger. Hikers describe lying in their tents at night, listening to footsteps. Not four-legged footsteps, which have a distinct rhythm, which sound like animal movement. Two-legged footsteps. The sound of something walking upright, walking on 2 feet, walking in a pattern that sounds human. The steps circle the tent. Slowly, methodically, walking around the tent, pausing, moving again. Not the random wandering of an animal foraging. The deliberate circling of something inspecting the tent, something interested in what is inside, something that seems to be watching. This has been reported by hundreds of hikers, the sound of something walking on 2 legs around their tent at night. The footsteps are clear, distinct, not imagined. They stop when the person inside the tent moves or makes noise. They resume when things are quiet. They continue for minutes or hours, this slow circling, this patient observation. The rational explanation is that these are bears. Black bears, which are common along the entire Appalachian Trail, do sometimes walk on 2 legs. They can stand upright. They can walk bipedally for short distances. And they are curious about tents, about the smells coming from human camps, about potential food sources. But bears do not typically circle tents. They approach, they investigate, they sniff around, and then they either try to get food or they leave. They do not engage in prolonged methodical circling. They do not walk around a tent multiple times, pausing at regular intervals, behaving in a way that seems calculated. Other explanations suggest other people. Locals who know the trail, who come into the forest at night, who observe hikers from the darkness. This is deeply unsettling, but probably happens occasionally. The Appalachian Trail passes through or near many communities. It is not difficult for someone to hike into the forest at night, to approach camps, to watch from the darkness. But why would someone do this? What is the motivation for walking around someone's tent at night, for circling it, for standing just outside in the darkness? The question has no good answer, and every possible answer is disturbing. Some hikers report hearing breathing outside their tents, not the breathing of an animal, which tends to be rapid and audible, the panting of something that has been exerting itself, slow, deep breathing. Deep. The breathing of something large, something standing still, something close to the tent wall. The sound is too loud to be wind, too rhythmic to be random. It sounds like someone or something standing just outside the tent, breathing, listening, waiting. When this happens, the hiker inside the tent faces a decision. Do you open the tent and look outside? Do you shine a light through the mesh, trying to see what is there? Do you call out, ask who is there, demand that they leave? Or do you stay quiet, stay still, hope that whatever is outside will lose interest and go away? There is an unwritten rule among hikers. If something is outside your tent at night, you do not unzip and look. You stay inside. You stay quiet. You wait it out. Because opening the tent means confronting what is outside, and what is outside may be something you do not want to confront. This rule is not based on specific incidents or official advice. It is folk wisdom, passed from hiker to hiker, a consensus reached through collective experience. People who have looked outside when something was circling their tent report that the experience was worse than staying inside would have been. They report seeing things that frightened them more than the unknown. They report that whatever was outside became more aggressive when confronted, when acknowledged, when seen. So you lie in your tent. You listen to the footsteps. You hear the breathing. You feel the presence of something just feet away, separated from you by thin fabric. And you wait. You wait for dawn. You wait for the sounds to stop. You wait for whatever is outside to leave. Most of the time, it does leave. The sun rises. You unzip the tent. You look outside. There is nothing there. No tracks that you can identify. No sign of what was circling your tent for hours. Just forest. Just morning light. just the normal appearance of a safe environment. But the experience stays with you. The memory of lying in darkness, listening to something walk around your tent, knowing that you were utterly vulnerable, utterly exposed, protected by nothing but a layer of fabric and the hope that whatever was outside would choose not to harm you. This is specific fear that the Appalachian Trail creates, not fear of definable threats that can be prepared for and defended against, but fear of the unknown, fear of the unseen, fear of lying helpless while something circles in the darkness, fear that is validated by the fact that it happens regularly, reported by hikers who have no reason to lie, who describe the same experience independently, who all followed the same unwritten rule. When something walks around your tent at night, you stay inside and you wait for morning. Appalachian folklore. Made real. The Appalachian Mountains have a folklore tradition that stretches back centuries, blending Native American beliefs, Scottish and Irish traditions brought by settlers, and accumulated local experience. Some of this folklore is clearly myth, stories told to entertain or teach moral lessons, but some of it contains practical warnings encoded in supernatural language, advice meant to keep people safe from real dangers. One of the most persistent Appalachian rules is don't whistle at night. This warning appears throughout the region, told in slightly different forms but with the same core message. Whistling after dark attracts attention. Whistling brings things to you. Whistling invites responses that you do not want. The explanation for this rule varies. Some say it attracts spirits or demons. Others say it draws predators or dangerous people. Some versions are vague, saying only that bad things happen to people who whistle at night in the mountains. But hikers on the Appalachian Trail report experiences that give this folklore disturbing credibility. They whistle, either to entertain themselves, to signal location to hiking partners, or out of habit. And something whistles back. Not an echo, not a bird. A whistle that comes from the forest, from the darkness, that matches the pitch and pattern of the whistle they made. They whistle again, testing, and the response comes again, closer this time. They stop whistling, unnerved, and after a moment the response comes anyway. The same tune, the same rhythm, coming from the darkness just beyond the edge of camp. This is deeply unsettling because it suggests intelligence, suggests something that is learning the pattern, mimicking it, responding not randomly but purposefully. An echo would repeat exactly. An animal would not whistle in human patterns. What whistles back is something else, something that heard the sound and is reproducing it, something that is communicating or perhaps luring. The folklore says that if you whistle and something whistles back, you should stop immediately. You should not whistle again. You should not respond. You should ignore any further whistles, no matter how close they seem, no matter how much they sound like they are coming from just outside your tent. Because what whistles in the Appalachian forest at night is not something you want to encourage. The folklore does not specify what it is, but the warning is clear. Whistling invites interaction, and interaction with whatever responds to whistles is dangerous. Related to this is the phenomenon of the mimics. Multiple hikers across decades, across different sections of trail, report hearing their names called in the forest. Not generic calls for help, not random sounds that might be misinterpreted as words. Their specific name, called clearly, in a voice that sounds familiar. The voice sounds like a hiking partner who is ahead on the trail or behind on the trail. It sounds like a family member, like a friend, like someone known and trusted. The hiker hears their name called and instinctively responds, calling back, asking where the person is, moving toward the voice. The voice calls again, still familiar, still trustworthy. It seems to be coming from just out of sight, from just beyond the next bend in the trail or just into the forest. The hiker follows, trying to catch up, trying to find the person who is calling, and the voice stays just ahead. Always just out of sight, always just far enough away that you cannot quite see who is calling. You follow for 50 feet, for 100 feet, for a quarter mile. You follow until you realize you are no longer on the trail, that you are lost in the forest, that you have been led away from the path by a voice that sounded exactly like someone you know. Then the voice stops. Whatever was calling your name goes silent. You are alone, disoriented, off trail, led into the forest by something that knew your name, that mimicked a familiar voice, that lured you step by step away from safety. The folklore calls these mimics. The tradition says that things in the forest can imitate human voices, that they learn names by listening to conversations, that they use these names to draw people away from groups, away from trails, away from safety. The folklore advises that if you hear your name called in the forest, especially if you are alone or if the voice is coming from an unexpected direction, you should not respond. You should not follow. You should return to the trail or to your camp, and you should ignore any further calls. Hikers who have experienced this, who have followed voices and realized their mistake, describe the experience as terrifying. They describe the voice as perfect, as indistinguishable from the real person, as so convincing that following it felt completely rational. They describe the moment of realization, when they understood they had been tricked, as one of the most frightening moments of their lives. Because if something in the forest can mimic voices perfectly, if it knows your name, if it can sound exactly like someone you trust, then how do you defend against it? How do you know when a call for help is real and when it is a lure? How do you distinguish between a genuine hiking partner and something pretending to be your partner? The folklore provides no good answer to this. The only defense is caution, is verifying before you follow, is staying on the trail even when every instinct says to go help the person calling your name. The folklore warns that the mimics are patient, that they will call for a long time, that they will sound desperate and afraid and hurt, all to convince you to follow. And if you do follow, if you leave the trail and go into the forest chasing a voice that sounds like someone you know, the folklore says you may not find your way back. You may become another disappearance, another missing hiker, another name added to the list of people who went into the Appalachian forest and never returned. Feral humans. The theory of feral humans in the Appalachian wilderness is one of the most controversial and disturbing pieces of trail folklore. The concept is simple. Some people who went into the mountains never came back to civilization. They survived in the forest, living wild, becoming more animal than human, avoiding contact with hikers and campers, but occasionally seen at the edges of camps, at the boundaries between the wild and the civilized. This theory is dismissed by most authorities as urban legend, as misidentification of animals, as the product of overactive imaginations in stressful environments. But the reports persist. Hikers see figures at tree line, standing just inside the forest, watching camps. The figures are human-shaped, bipedal, but their behavior is wrong. They do not call out, they do not approach. They simply watch, motionless for minutes or hours, then move away silently when noticed. These figures are described as pale, thin, often naked or dressed in rags. Their movement is described as wrong, not quite human, animalistic but not matching any known animal. They appear at dusk or dawn, in the liminal times when visibility is poor but not absent. They are seen most often in the more remote sections of trail, areas where days can pass without encountering other hikers. The witnesses are credible. Experienced hikers, park rangers, people whose observations should be trusted. They report what they saw, aware that it sounds implausible, aware that they will likely not be believed, but compelled to document the experience. The feral human theory attempts to explain these sightings. It posits that people who became lost in the Appalachian wilderness, particularly in the early and mid-20th century, before search and rescue became sophisticated, sometimes survived long enough to adapt. They learned to find food and water. They learned to avoid people. They became permanent residents of the deep forest, living in ways that kept them hidden from hikers and authorities. Over years or decades, their humanity would erode. Without social contact, without language, without the structures of civilization, they would become feral. They would retain human shape and intelligence, but would behave more like animals, avoiding contact, living primitively, watching from a distance. This theory is scientifically questionable. Humans are not well adapted to living wild in temperate forests. We lack the fur, the claws, the digestive systems that would make long-term wilderness survival feasible without tools and preparation. A person lost in the woods would likely die of exposure or starvation within weeks, not adapt and survive for years. But the theory persists because the sightings persist, Because people continue to report seeing figures that look human but behave in ways that are not human. Because the Appalachian forest is vast enough, remote enough, that someone trying to hide could conceivably do so, especially if they knew the terrain well, if they had decades to learn the patterns of rangers and hikers, to learn where people go and where they do not. The missing person statistics support at least the possibility. Hundreds of people have disappeared in and around the Appalachian Trail over the decades. Most are eventually found, dead or alive, but some are not. Some vanish completely, leaving no trace, no body, no evidence of what happened. The official assumption is that they died and their bodies were not recovered, that they are somewhere in the vast forest, decomposed beyond recognition or in locations that have never been searched. But the feral human theory suggests an alternative. Some of those missing people are still alive, still in the forest, changed by decades of isolation, no longer recognizable as the person who disappeared, no longer capable of or interested in returning to civilization. They exist in the spaces between the trails and the towns, in the deep forest that hikers pass through but do not explore, living a wild existence that would seem impossible but somehow persists. This theory is horror, not because of what it suggests about monsters or supernatural entities, but because of what it suggests about humans, that we are not as far from animals as we think, that remove the structures of society, remove social contact and language and tools, and we revert to something primitive, something that watches from tree lines and moves through the forest at night and avoids the light. Whether feral humans actually exist in the Appalachian wilderness is unknown and probably unknowable. The reports of watchers at treeline, of naked figures moving through the forest, of things that look almost human but move wrong, these reports could have many explanations. Misidentified animals, tricks of light and shadow, psychological phenomena caused by isolation and fear. But the theory will not die because the sightings continue. Because experienced observers, people who know the difference between a bear and a human, continue to report seeing something that does not fit into neat categories, something human-shaped but wrong, something that watches from the darkness and then vanishes before it can be confirmed or documented. The not deer. One of the strangest phenomena reported by Appalachian Trail hikers is the not deer. This is a recent name for an old observation, a term that emerged from internet discussions of strange wildlife encounters, but describes experiences that have been reported for decades. A not deer looks like a deer. It has 4 legs, a deer-like body, the general shape and size of a deer. But something is wrong. The proportions are slightly off. The legs are too long, or the neck is too short, or the body is too narrow. The movement is wrong, stiff, mechanical, as if something unfamiliar with how deer move is puppeting the body. Most disturbingly, not deer stare. Actual deer, when they see humans, either freeze briefly and then flee, or ignore humans entirely if they are accustomed to human presence. But not deer stare. They lock eyes with the observer, and they do not look away. They watch with an intensity that feels predatory, that feels wrong for a prey animal. This triggers the uncanny valley response in observers. The uncanny valley is a concept from robotics and animation, the idea that something that looks almost human but has subtle wrongness creates deep discomfort, creates a visceral negative response. The theory is that humans evolved to detect members of their own species, to distinguish humans from non-humans, and that when something falls into the borderline category, almost right but detectably wrong, it triggers alarm responses. Not deer create the same response. They look almost right, almost like deer. But the wrongness is detectable, and the brain reacts with fear and revulsion, with a sense that what you are looking at is dangerous even though you cannot articulate why. Reports of not deer on the Appalachian Trail describe them appearing at dusk or dawn, standing at the edge of clearings or on the trail itself. They do not flee when approached. They stand and stare. Hikers report walking toward them, and the not deer not moving, not reacting, just watching with too focused attention. Some reports describe not deer walking on 2 legs, rearing up and walking bipedally, in a way that deer do not do, in a way that looks unnatural, looks wrong. The movement is described as stiff, as if the joints are bending in ways that are anatomically incorrect. Other reports describe not deer following hikers, staying parallel to the trail, moving through the forest, keeping pace with the hiker, always just visible through the trees. Real deer do not do this. Deer either run away or ignore humans. They do not follow. They do not track. But not deer apparently do, moving through the forest in ways that suggest intent, suggest pursuit. The rational explanation for not deer sightings is that they are sick or injured deer. Deer with chronic wasting disease, a neurological condition that affects deer in some regions, can behave strangely. They can be unusually bold, can have disturbed movement patterns, can seem wrong in ways that are hard to define. But chronic wasting disease does not explain all not deer sightings. It does not explain the reports of deer standing and staring for prolonged periods. It does not explain the tracking behavior. It does not explain why the proportions look wrong, why the movement seems mechanical. Alternative explanations suggest misidentification. What observers think is a deer is actually something else, another animal seen in poor light or at a distance, the brain filling in details and creating the impression of a deer that is somehow wrong. But the observers insist these are not misidentifications. They describe seeing the creatures clearly, in good light, close enough that details are visible. They describe the features of a deer, the body of a deer, but something fundamentally wrong that they cannot fully articulate, but is unmistakable. The not deer phenomenon is disturbing because it suggests that the forest contains things that are almost recognizable, almost familiar, but wrong in ways that trigger deep unease. Whether these are actual anomalous animals, whether they are sick animals behaving strangely, whether they are misperceptions or psychological phenomena, they create an atmosphere of wrongness, a sense that the Appalachian forest is not quite what it seems. And hikers who have seen not deer report being deeply unsettled by the experience. They report that seeing something that looks like a deer but is detectably wrong creates a feeling of unreality, creates doubt about other observations, makes them question whether what they are seeing in the forest is actually what it appears to be. Why people really die out there. The disturbing folklore and strange sightings on the Appalachian Trail are compelling, but they are not the primary reason the trail is dangerous. The real danger is more mundane and more inevitable. People die on the Appalachian Trail because wilderness is dangerous, because the human body is fragile, because mistakes in the backcountry have consequences that would be minor in civilization, but are fatal in the forest. The actual death toll on the Appalachian Trail is difficult to determine with precision. The Appalachian Trail Conservancy tracks deaths that are reported, deaths where a body is found or where witnesses confirm someone died. But many people who die in the forest are never found. They become missing persons, not confirmed deaths. They are somewhere in the 2,000 miles of wilderness, but their exact fate is unknown. Conservative estimates suggest 3 to 5 deaths per year on the Appalachian Trail. This includes all causes: accidents, exposure, medical emergencies, violence. Over the 80-plus years since the trail was completed, this would mean 250 to 400 deaths. But these are only the confirmed deaths. The actual number is likely higher, possibly significantly higher. Some people who disappear and are never found presumably died, but are not counted in death statistics because there is no body, no proof. Some people died just off the trail, in areas adjacent to the Appalachian Trail corridor, and their deaths are not attributed to the trail. The primary cause of death is exposure, particularly hypothermia. As discussed earlier, cold kills quickly in the mountains, and people underestimate the danger. They do not bring adequate clothing, they get wet, they become exhausted. Their core temperature drops and they die, sometimes within sight of shelter or help. The second major cause is falls. The Appalachian Trail includes steep, rocky sections where a misstep can result in a fall of dozens or hundreds of feet. Some of these areas have names that reflect their danger: Lehigh Gap, Mahoosuk Notch, the Whites, the Presidentials. These sections are challenging even for experienced hikers, and fatigue or poor weather can turn them deadly. Medical emergencies kill regularly on the trail. Heart attacks, strokes, aneurysms, conditions that would be survivable with quick access to medical care but are fatal when they occur miles from the nearest road. The physical stress of long-distance hiking, the elevation changes, the exertion, all of these can trigger medical events in people who have underlying conditions they may not even know about. Getting lost remains a persistent danger, despite the trail being well marked. People step off trail for various reasons and cannot find their way back. The Geraldine Largay case is the most famous example, but it happens regularly. People get disoriented, make poor navigation decisions, and end up miles from the trail, unable to signal for help, dying of exposure or starvation or injuries sustained while trying to find their way back. The time window for survival when something goes wrong is shockingly small. If you are injured and cannot walk, if you are hypothermic and cannot generate heat, if you are lost and exhausted, you have perhaps 24 to 48 hours before the situation becomes critical. In cold weather, or if you are already compromised, the window can be much shorter. Search and rescue efforts, while professional and dedicated, take time to mobilize. If someone does not show up at an expected location, it may be hours or a day before anyone realizes they are missing. Then, a search has to be organized. Then, searchers have to reach the area and begin searching. By the time organized search begins, the missing person may have already been in the wilderness for 24 hours or more, may already be in dire condition. GPS technology has improved safety on the trail, but it has limitations. Many sections of the Appalachian Trail have no cell service. GPS devices work in these areas, but they cannot send messages or call for help. They can tell you where you are, but if you are injured or lost and cannot walk, knowing your location does not save you unless you can communicate that location to rescuers. Satellite communication devices like Garmin InReach or Spot have become more common among hikers. These allow you to send distress signals even when outside cell coverage, but they require you to be conscious and able to activate them. If you fall and are knocked unconscious, if you are hypothermic and confused, the device may be in your pack, but you may not be capable of using it. The psychological breakdown that occurs when people realize they are in serious trouble is a factor that is difficult to quantify but is present in many trail deaths. Panic sets in. Rational decision-making collapses. People make choices that worsen their situation, that use up energy, that move them further from safety. The mind fractures when faced with the reality of dying alone in the wilderness. Some people give up, sitting down and waiting for death rather than continuing to try to save themselves. Others become manic, hyperactive, moving constantly but without purpose or direction. Both responses reduce the chances of survival. The Appalachian Trail is designed to be accessible, to be hikeable by people with moderate fitness and basic outdoor skills. And for the vast majority of hikers, it is safe. Thousands of people complete through hikes every year. Hundreds of thousands day hike sections of the trail. Most have wonderful experiences and return home safely. But the trail is still wilderness, still remote, still dangerous, and every year a small percentage of the people who go into that wilderness do not come back. They die of cold or falls or getting lost or medical emergencies or violence. They die alone, often just hours or miles from safety. But those hours and those miles are enough. The Appalachian Trail is beautiful. It is rewarding. It is one of the great long-distance hiking experiences in the world. But it is also a graveyard, 2,000 miles of forest that contains the remains of people who underestimated the wilderness, who made small mistakes that became fatal, who learned too late that the trail does not forgive errors. The trail that never ends. The Appalachian Trail is the longest marked footpath in the world, 2,190 miles from Springer Mountain in Georgia to Mount Katahdin in Maine. It crosses 14 states, passes through 8 national forests, 6 national parks, and countless state and local parks. It is one of the most iconic hiking destinations on Earth, and somewhere along its length, people are dying right now. This year, this season. Someone who started a through hike in Georgia in March or April, who is now somewhere in Virginia or Pennsylvania or New Hampshire, will not finish. They will become a statistic, another name added to the list, another death that contributes to the trail's reputation as beautiful and deadly. The deaths are not frequent enough to discourage hiking. The percentage of hikers who die on the trail is very small compared to the total number of hikers. But the deaths are constant. Year after year, decade after decade, the trail takes its toll. And the cumulative effect is that the Appalachian Trail is, in a very real sense, the world's longest graveyard. Not all of the dead are recovered. Some bodies are found years or decades after death in areas that were searched but where the bodies were missed, hidden by terrain or vegetation. Some are never found. They remain in the forest, decomposed, scattered, becoming part of the ecosystem they died in. Hikers pass these locations without knowing. You walk through a section of trail and you do not know that 50 feet into the forest, a body lies undiscovered. You camp at a shelter and you do not know that a hiker died there 20 years ago or 10 years ago or last year. The trail does not mark these deaths. There are no memorials at most death sites. The forest simply continues, and the history of what happened is forgotten except in official records and in the memories of families who lost someone. The trail does not care about this history. This is not callousness. This is simply reality. The trail is a footpath through wilderness. It exists as a line on a map, as a series of white blazes on trees, as the collective effort of volunteers who maintain it year after year. But it has no agency, no awareness, no capacity to care about the people who walk it or the people who die on it. The mountains are older than anything, older than trees, older than animals, older than humans. They were here long before the trail was built. They will be here long after the trail falls into disrepair and is reclaimed by forest. The mountains do not notice human life. We are insects to them, brief presences that appear and disappear in timescales too short to register. The deaths on the Appalachian Trail come from many sources: hypothermia, falls, heart attacks, getting lost, violence, animal attacks, though these are rare, lightning strikes, falling trees, infections that become septic in the backcountry, allergic reactions, dehydration. The causes are varied, but the result is always the same. Someone who entered the forest does not leave it. But perhaps the most disturbing deaths are those that remain unexplained, the disappearances where no body is found, where the person simply vanishes, where search efforts find nothing and the case goes cold. These deaths, if they are deaths, are mysteries that are never solved. And then there are the reports from other hikers, the stories told at shelters at night, the experiences shared on trail forums and in hiking blogs. The encounters with things that do not fit into normal categories, the voices that call from the forest, the figures that watch from tree lines, the sounds outside tents at night, the not deer, the footsteps that circle camps, the zones of silence where screams for help go unheard, the magnetic anomalies that make compasses spin, the feeling of being followed, of being watched, of not being alone in the forest even when you know you are miles from another human. These reports, these experiences, they are part of the Appalachian Trail's reality. Whether they have rational explanations, whether they are psychological phenomena, or misidentifications, or actual anomalous occurrences, they contribute to the trail's atmosphere. They make the trail feel haunted, feel dangerous in ways beyond the measurable dangers of weather and terrain. And hikers who have heard their names called from the forest, who have followed voices into the woods only to realize they were following something that was not human, who have lain in their tents listening to footsteps circle for hours, these hikers carry the memory of those experiences forever. They know that something exists in the Appalachian forest that is not explained in guidebooks, that is not acknowledged by officials, that is real whether or not it can be proven. The final disturbing truth about the Appalachian Trail is that we do not fully understand what is happening in that forest. We know the measurable dangers. We know about hypothermia and falls and getting lost. But we do not know why people hear their names called. We do not know what circles tents at night. We do not know where all the missing people have gone. The trail remains, beautiful, challenging, rewarding for those who respect it and prepare properly. But also dangerous, also deadly. Also strange in ways that resist easy explanation. People will continue to hike the Appalachian Trail. They will continue to attempt through hikes, to day hike favorite sections, to experience the beauty of the mountains and the satisfaction of long-distance walking. Most will return safely. Most will have wonderful memories and will recommend the experience to others. But some will not return. Some will join the list of those who died on the trail. And some, a small number but more than zero, will experience things in the forest that will change them, that will make them question what they know about the world, that will leave them with stories they struggle to tell because they know how implausible they sound. The Appalachian Trail is the world's longest graveyard, not because death is common there, but because death is constant there. Because across 2,000 miles and 80 years, hundreds of people have died, and their bodies remain somewhere in that vast forest, and their stories become part of the trail's legend. The trail remembers nothing, but the forest remembers. The old mountains remember. And somewhere in the green tunnel, in the zones of silence, in the deep forest where few hikers venture, the dead remain, unrecovered, unmarked, part of the wilderness forever.